another, but right now, all leaders everywhere are facing the same crisis, and it's safe to say that for most, it's the crisis of their lifetime. So I want to thank all of you right at the top of this call on behalf of Rob, Trevor, everybody at Rhapsody. Great to have our colleagues, Catherine and Steve here as well. We want to thank you for taking the time to be here. There is strength in numbers. And again, as we come together, we're able to support each other through a very difficult time. Today's call, we're really happy to have two guests with us that are going to bring their expertise and knowledge to the conversation. We have Yusuf Lekadir from GSMPC, and why don't you wave there, Yusuf, so everyone can see who you are. Great to have you here. He's a brilliant accountant with a really good mind for business, and we also are joined by Denis Sicat, founding partner of Sicat Guilbeault. Denis, maybe you can wave so everyone can identify you in the feed. He has both an accounting background and is a very accomplished business lawyer, and again, one of the best business minds that I know. And we've asked them to join us on today's call to talk about the whole notion of financial resilience, of surviving this crisis and thriving, coming through on the other side. And to frame the call, I thought what we would do to start it off, we've been using a framework with all of our clients about the various phases of crisis management. And it's been a framework that's been very, very helpful in helping anchor conversations with an eye to the future. And so I'm going to ask Trav, maybe you could walk us through that model just quickly as a way of framing today's conversation.
Sure, I'm happy to do that, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces as well as some new ones as well. It's my real pleasure to be with you today. When we think about emergency response, there's three core phases that are front and center right now. There are actually additional phases. We won't get into those, but it's the immediate response, and then the recovery. And then there's another element which doesn't get talked about quite enough, but we want to spend a little bit of time on today as well, which is around resilience, right? The response is the first piece when all of a sudden everything has gone sideways. The unexpected has happened, or it's played out in an unexpected ways. You know, if we thought of this in terms of, some kind of building disaster or fire, it would be the explosion. Fire crews are rushing, people are showing up, they're trying to understand the situation, what are our options, what are our choices, and then how do we start to bring some kind of stability to this situation so that we can get things under control. You know, we don't know if it's a 1 alarm, a 2 alarm, a 5 alarm, and right now we're kind of still in that phase. And what has been quite striking about this crisis is actually in some ways it's moving very quickly, in other ways it's very slow. We're used to understanding the notion of the explosion and the fire crews arrive and they stabilize things within a few hours, and then we can start to get things back to normal. But we're still in the midst of that response right now. What we're headed towards, and what successful organizations will do in order to recover better, is to start to think about the recovery phase. Recovery is that return to normal operations. How do we get back to starting to normalize? And you don't finish response and then start recovery. They will start to overlap a little bit. And I'll tell you, that is very demanding for a leader who is still dealing with all of the response issues, but then also starting to look and say, how do we bring stability to this situation? How do we get back to normal? The challenge, and Eric has spoken to this already, is that we're not clear what normal is going to look like here. The normal part is actually uncertain. And that's a part where we need to start to anticipate of the behavioral changes that we're all embracing right now. Social distancing, working from home. Rob, what was it? The Zoom numbers went from 10 million users to 500 million. Did I get that right?
It was, they jumped from 10 million to 200 million.
To 200. So forgive me for overstating it. The 10 million to 200 million in such a short period of time in response to everyone rushing online. So that's happening. The physical distancing is changing. The use of delivery services is changing. All kinds of things are shifting, transforming, and changing right now. And what we don't know is which will become normal when we're done. And so that final part, we talked about response, we talked about recovery, that return to normal. The third part is that resilience, which is not just how do we bounce back, but how do we bounce back stronger than we were before? How do we bounce back in a way that gives us lots of future ahead in terms of what things are going to look like, where we're going to head next, how as organizations and how we help our clients in many cases to find that new kind of normal. So I think that's just an overview that I hope is useful as we have this discussion, because I know a number of the measures that we're seeing from the government are response measures. What do we do right now? Some of them are recovery. Not a lot of conversation on the resilience piece, but I expect we'll see more of that to come in the near future.
That's great, Trev. Thank you. I think one author referred to the resilience phase, in reference to the resilience phase, made the observation that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, that it really is an opportunity to have an eye for the future about not just making it through right now, but how do we emerge on the other side stronger, better, faster, to borrow words from the Bionic Man. If I might, and there I'm dating myself again, and yet I think there's a lot of folks on this call who know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's good. We're in this together. Let me turn my attention for a moment, if I might, to Denis. Denis, you and I yesterday, in preparation for this call, were discussing the approach that you called it a back to basics approach, and you even told a story about an experience with a contractor that was doing some work for you. Why don't you walk us through your back to basics approach before we get into the nitty and gritty of the financials?
Okay, thank you, Eric. I'll use the example of the contractor to start with. I had a contractor come to the cottage to do some work, and I was expecting, I know him well, and I was expecting to see an employee, and he showed up, the owner himself. And we had a nice chat, and he said, he's my age and he's been at it for a long time. And he said, I have to reconnect with my clients. I have to do what I did in the past to bring the business to where it is. The success factors that I used to build a business are more important now than ever. So he was using this crisis as a way to reconnect with the basic work of his business. And I found it, exactly to the point. And we had a good discussion about it.
Right. I had one marketer that was a video that I saw recently who talked about how to market in this kind of environment. And his comment was that in this type of crisis moment, it's less about branding and it's more about bonding. It's more about connecting with your clients, connecting with your network, and being a resource. Then you walk us through, you run a very successful law firm. You have had to take some measures, obviously, to adjust to what's happening. And I really like the framework of the back to basics approach that you used yesterday. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, first of all, I don't run the firm. I can't take the credit for that. I mean, Sophie's on the call, and my brother Michel has been the managing partner, and he's been doing a great job. So what we did for our firm is when the announcement came, we did as Trevor said, the response stage, or I called it a reactive stage, is to go back to basics. Is we went through everything, all our expenses, all of the items that were discretionary. What can we adjust? I mean, most business owners did that automatically as a survival reflex. That is normal. Once that was determined, so, okay, we have now established this action plan. Then, of course, we lean towards the revenue side. And in a law firm, well, our employees are income generators, so it's a bit tricky. We can't just deal with employees quite that easy. And most businesses are like that too. So the next back to basics was, well, then we addressed the lawyers and the partners, and basically everybody is now working, and the owners, the partners, we're now back in what we call worker mode. And our job is work, is to contact our clients, is to communicate, is to be there. So yes, we are back to basics at our firm, and we have now completed, as of April 1st, our internal restructuring. So we are now what we call in the recovery, rebound stage, and we're entering into that phase now.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's the whole notion that we've got so much going on already as leaders, and I'd love to see, maybe with a show of hands, or maybe put a comment in the chat window, how many of you are finding yourself as leaders having to take on responsibilities, going back in some ways to basics in your business as part of your response to all of this. Yeah, let me see your hands for those of you that are, several of you. In many ways, again, things have really changed. Let me shift it over to Yusuf now, if I might. And Yusuf, I mean, this is the world that you live in, the world of numbers, the world of finance, helping organizations stay on top of all of that. What are you hearing in terms of some of the top pain points, and what are you recommending? What is some of the I guess the best advice that you're giving out to some of your clients to weather this storm?
Yeah, so it's definitely been a crazy couple weeks. The federal government has announced a variety of programs, some of which have passed and are law, and some of them they're currently working on. Some of the biggest things that I'm seeing, obviously, are internal restructurings, similar to what Dennis was talking about. And really managing the company's cash flows. I think the biggest thing that we're doing right now is working with the banks and the lenders, because there have been a variety of programs that have come out. For example, the Business Credit Availability Program with BDC and EDC. In several cases, we're going to BDC and we're putting together packages for the clients. And asking for up to $2 million to try and weather the storm. Because the bulk of my clients are in the construction industry, I'm finding that even though their work is continuing and they're able to work through the current situation, a lot of them are seeing their receivables just get higher and higher and higher because the movement of money has slowed down. And so even though they're able to generate the revenues, they might not be able to convert their receivables into cash as quickly as they used to, because when people panic, they tend to hold on to their money and not pay their bills as quickly. So I'm definitely seeing a slowdown in the amount of, when it comes to collections. And I'm working with my clients to try and put in measures and processes, and like Denny was suggesting, looking at the expenses and maybe trimming some fat to get through this situation.
Right, and what we're seeing is an analogy that I've been using is that when this crisis hit, there are businesses or industries, I should say, that are kind of like, well, they're at ground zero. They're at the point of impact where they feel and have felt this crisis immediately. Businesses that have had to lay off all their staff, close their doors, obviously not just because of the risk of getting infected, but the government, deeming them non-essential. And so there's retail and restaurants and bars and a lot of folks in the medical field. I've got a couple of clients that I believe one of them is even on the call today, that had to close their clinics down temporarily. And then you've got organizations and industries where we're feeling the ripple, but there's a lag between ground zero and its impact moving out. What advice would the two of you, and I'll throw this out to both you and Denis, for those ground zero type organizations, what are some survival strategies for them when really overnight their revenues have been turned off, and now they're just trying to weather the next several months before they can potentially open their doors again and keep going? So that either one of you, feel free to jump in here.
Yusuf, I can start if you want. I have quite a few clients that own restaurants, and it is a very difficult time because, as you stated, Eric, their revenue is zero, and some of them have great managers and people have been working for them for years, and they don't want to lose them. So the question I am receiving from these ground zero people is, should I be keeping my business afloat? These are really hard questions to ask. And, some of them have built personal wealth over the years, as they should, working hard all these years in preparation for retirement. The question then, should I be using my retirement funds to keep my business alive until it gets better? And the big question is, when is that going to occur? And we cannot expect the business to go from 0 to 100%. There's going to be, the behavioral changes that have occurred, there will be a time where people will warm up, but it won't be instant. So although we have to remain positive, we also have to be realistic about it. So for these clients, what we have done is we have looked at, their leases in particular, because that is the main expense that they have. Restaurant leases are by far one of the most expensive of all the retail establishments, and so we're looking for what's called force majeure clauses, provisions in the lease. So we're trying to help them from a legal angle, but also coach them through discussions with their landlord. That's one. Number two, of course, some of them have financing on their leasehold improvements, and they may be eligible for some deferral on principals. But at the core is the strength, the financial strength of the restaurant itself and the business. And it goes for all the ground zero businesses. The same principles apply.
Yusuf, what would you add to that? And then I know that Sophie had her hand up, so I'll make sure to give her the floor. But before that, what would you add to that, Yusuf?
Yeah, Denis brings up some very good points. And, the federal programs that have come out, some of them are going to help. But when your business is closed, these programs are pretty much useless, to say the least. And if you're operating we're operating a very successful restaurant with revenues and costs into the millions. Well, a $40,000 bank loan won't do much, and subsidizing your payroll when there are no employees will not do much. And so it's very case by case. But Dennis brings up some great points on the leases and the deferral options on the mortgages or loans that they have. There are also programs out there, as you may know, to defer any HST obligations or income tax obligations. HST, the deadline to pay as of right now is June 30th. On the income tax side of things right now, the deadline is August 31st. And so there are some deferral opportunities that exist to try and help the owners, but it's really case by case.
Right. Let's move perhaps beyond the ripple. And Sophie just let me know that she was actually just answering my question from earlier. So thank you, Sophie. So there's ground zero type industries, and then there's the other businesses that at some level are going to feel the ripple, but are in that lag factor of maybe there's been an impact immediately, but it's not as significant. They're able to continue to operate. But given the fact that we're entering, as we spoke about on a recent call, that this is not just a winter storm that is going to blow over in a few days, that this is truly a new winter that we're all entering, really globally, a new global winter from a business perspective, that we're really hunkering down for several more months of this crisis being front and center, and the measures that are currently being implemented, potentially tightening up even further, at least in the near future, but probably with us right through to the summer. So when we talk about the organizations, and let me ask, how many on the call would say would be okay just waving your hand saying I'm one of those ground zero businesses and have felt the impact right away? If that's you, let me see your hands. Yeah, okay, yeah, definitely. We have a few of you here on the call. Who are the ones that are sort of in the outer ripple? You're not at ground zero, you're feeling an impact, but you're still operating, you're still trying to move forward, and that's a lot of you as well. What is some of the strategies that we should be embracing as business owners when we know that this is going to be, first of all, several months of winter, followed by, again, to borrow the analogy we used from a recent call, a mini ice age, economically speaking, where the economy is going to take some time before it bounces back. What are the strategies that, again, the best advice that the two of you are giving clients on how to not only respond and recover, but to plan for resilience in the future?
Yusuf, I'll start again. It's the, there's some very good authors out there, and I've been reading up on it, and there's good content. And one in particular raised some of the principles that we should be adopting as business owners to ride the storm, right? As Eric said, it's not a typical winter storm. It looks like one of those planetary storms that we may have for a long time. The only constant we've had so far is the uncertainty, right? That's the only constant. We just don't know where it will end and how it will end and when. So as leaders, I think when we start and we have employees looking up to us and clients and customers, our stakeholders, the first thing we have to do is to be, I think, very visible. And I don't mean visible in person now. I mean, I think we're more visible now than ever with our remote connections. But we have to be visible. The author said, purposeful and authentic. You have to be authentic. You cannot BS your way around this when you're speaking with your stakeholders, meaning your employees and everybody else. What we've done at the firm, and that's what I convey to my clients, share your key objectives and the rationales. Don't be a task delegator, but explain the why. More than ever, we have to explain the why that we are doing the things that we have done. And Sophie and Michelle in my office just did just that. It was a step-by-step rationale with execution. And you basically also delegate the tactics to the employees. The employees, the people on the ground, they know a lot more than we do often about the day-to-day and what needs to be done. So, empower them more than ever. We also have to do what I call a now, next, and later thinking. We just can't just live in the now, right? If we live in the now, we're just being reactive. We need to be reactive because we don't know what is next, but we cannot be only reactive. We need to start thinking and be more imaginative about what may happen and what may transpire. So it's striking a balance between being reactive and having, keeping the imagination alive of what could be, what could evolve from this. And of course, the frequent, informing everyone on the crisis and to be informed on the crisis. So I've been speaking to many clients, and the impact of the crisis on them, I could not have necessarily foreseen. So until you speak with people who are living it, only then will you truly know its impact. So it's about educating ourselves as leaders also.
Right. You talked about two things there before I pass it back over to Yusuf, but two things that struck me in what you said. One is the importance of communication, open, honest, frequent communication. I think we're even seeing that from governments worldwide, including our own daily briefings on what's happening. Sometimes even coming forward with information that's not complete, but it's what they have in the moment. And I think that is so crucial. The other point you made, Denis, about remaining creative and open to new ways of doing business. How might we emerge differently from this? The challenge, I think, is that the thinking and the posture of both the mind and the spirit when we're in response and recovery is a very different mindset, a very different state than the creative state. And the challenge can be trying to be creative when, how am I going to make payroll in 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And to that point, Eric, because now recent days I've been trying to think about my firm's strategic plan but as most people on the call understand, a strategic plan is based on the history of your success. What are your success factors, and how can we make them recurring? And what are the resources that we need to put aside? And all the creative thinking that goes into a strategic plan. But it's, at the end of the day, it's always based on historical trends and the history of the business. And now I've kind of trying to grasp what is going on. I call it more like a reflective strategy. So before you get into a strategic plan thinking, you really have to insert another step that wasn't necessarily there before, which is, wait a minute, the business that I know and the industry in which I'm in may be completely changed. So I cannot use the past key success factors and extrapolate that will be the future success, right? So there's going to be just simply more reflection by business owners to think things through and to be creative. And that's how I see it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I heard somebody say recently, all of a sudden we're all startups.
Well, yes, to that
in many
point.
ways.
A business plan, a business plan and a strategic plan are very different. A business plan is often what is the document that we need when we're starting up a new business. So now we have leaders talking about, I no longer need a strategic plan, I need a new business plan, which is a big statement to make.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yusuf, would love to hear from you again. Strategies for these, for those of us that are in, not at ground zero, but on the periphery of it and feeling the ripples, what you'd recommend. I also want to really encourage all of you. I know lots of you have come on this call with questions. There's so much information coming so fast, and in all of the noise, it can be very, very confusing. So we want to be able to give some insight where we can today. So feel free to please type your questions in the chat bar, get our attention, and we'll do our best to direct those questions to our guest today and to others who may be able to help us. But Yusuf, your thoughts?
Yeah, and one of the things you said, Eric, when you began this this call, is that we're all in it together. So, I've mentioned that working with your bankers, the landlords, the lenders is key. But I think communicating with your clients and communicating with your suppliers is as important. Obviously in this environment, people are going to tend to hold on to their cash a little longer. But I'm finding that if you're having open discussions with your suppliers and your clients, then you can work through those issues because everybody is going through them. So you might as well be open and have frank discussions about the situation and how you can get through it together. Another thing that I'm seeing in companies that haven't been impacted yet but will be impacted soon enough are proactive discussions with employees. Obviously there's a lot of restructuring going around, there's layoffs, terminations, and all that. But I think that if you have an open discussion with your staff and you in some situations, reduced work hours might make sense for some staff. And so the owners might be able to get some savings there while accommodating the employees, because I've seen situations where parents have to stay at home because schools and daycares are closed, so they don't mind reduced hours. And so you're able to keep, the people that you've brought on to be part of your team, you're able to keep more of them through this crisis as opposed to just keeping some of them. So I think having an open discussion with your suppliers, bankers, clients, employees, everybody around you about the situation. I think business owners are finding that they're getting better results doing that in anticipation of things getting a little worse if you haven't been one of the businesses that have been shut down so far.
Right. There's we often say in our work, obviously our work is with leaders and organizations across multiple industries, is that in all of our years and in literally the hundreds and hundreds of conversations we've had with leaders and organizations, we have yet to meet an organization that over communicates. In most cases, it's often a challenge. There's often a lack of communication in most organizations. And if there's ever a time where it's needed more, is in times of crisis. And my dad was an accountant. Some of you may not know that. He was a very successful accountant, had his own firm here in the city for many, many years before he retired. And he used to talk about the notion of talk or pay. When you're in a cash flow crisis, you either pay your bills or you talk, but you can't not do either. And I know that many of my clients that they've been able to arrange deferment on loan payments, in some cases even insurance premiums, credit cards, that right now there is an openness, obviously, to come to terms better terms so that the businesses can survive. So talking is so important. We have a few questions coming in, a number of questions coming in. We're going to do our best here. So again, I'm going to post these to both Denis and Yusuf, but I want to encourage, of course, my colleagues to pipe in as well with your thoughts. One of the first questions that came in is, can we anticipate help? And I'm assuming here we're talking government help for ground zero businesses. What are your thoughts on those? Denis, you'll need to unmute, brother.
I did exactly what you're a visionary, Eric.
It happens on every call.
Yusuf alluded to it. If no cash flows coming in, how can you service the employees? I doubt, this is more a personal opinion, I doubt very much there can be more help for the ground zero. It's unfortunate, very unfortunate. I hope that there will be something that comes out of it, but for now, as Yusuf said, it's a very difficult situation.
I think there was a lot of hope being pinned on the 75% wage subsidy program, but the reality is, for a ground zero business that's already laid off their staff, that program is really of no help whatsoever. Your thoughts on that, Yusuf?
I agree with Dennis. I mean, it's case by case. I'm hearing a lot of rumors going around on how they think they're going to be able to help the restaurants, when things get back to normal. I've heard rumors about meals and entertainment being 100% deductible in the future. But again, these aren't immediate measures, and like Dennis, I'm not very hopeful that I don't think anything's going to be done, because I don't know what they could do right now to help businesses that are at ground zero.
Right. And another question from Yusuf, I'll keep you on the line if I might. This direct question was directed at you from Catherine, one of our team members, on what advice you would have for business owners if we truly need to look at ourselves in many ways, that we are now all startups. What advice would you give us that you haven't already given us along those lines, to think like a startup?
Well, I think if you're at ground zero and you need to think ground up, I think the number one thing you need to look at the moment are your cash outflows. I think you need to do a deep dive into the business and look at what your ongoing costs are, what your margins are. Go back to the basics: budgeting, forecasting, respecting your budgets. I think that if you go back to those basics, that most startups have to deal with, I think you have a shot at getting out of this. But you do have to do a very deep dive into the business, and the timing of the cash flows plays a key part.
Denis, did you have something to add to that?
Well, yes, Yusuf hit the nail on the head. It's like I said earlier, it's the business plan. An existing business should be doing a strategic plan and reviewing a strategic plan. A lot of these businesses now have to think themselves as a startup, as the question was well asked, and that means doing a deep dive and doing the business plan and cash flows and everything else, and revisiting the assumptions on which you will earn those cash flows and incur those expenses. So, yeah.
Another great question here. This one from Nicole. And again, I'll just put it out there, and whichever one of you wants to jump in first. Are there suggested resources business owners, leaders can access to help guide the rejigging of a strategic plan during a time of crisis?
Well, as I was reading up before this call, it dawned on me that there might be a new consulting industry about to start, and it is to help businesses with this crisis. Unfortunately, I did not find much. It will be a different way. The historical way of dealing with strategic plans will change, has changed. Like I said, I believe there will be an additional step or two. And I believe very shortly there will be tools for us, for business owners. And I'm sure there are people that are working on that right now. They've seen the opportunity that is there.
Right. Right. Trev, maybe there's a great example of something that happened this week with one of our clients who you were able to help reframe in some ways the work that you were doing with her. And perhaps you could speak to that.
Yeah, happily. Of course, when you start saying that, I'm like, oh my God, which example is he talking about? So, but I think
let's see if you get the right one.
So there was a discussion between a CEO and her board about the priorities that they need to address in the midst of all of this. And the bulk of the conversation was focused on, they had made some layoffs, about how soon they get the staff back. How soon do we get people back in their jobs as well? And I mean, that's important for all of us. We all have team members who we've worked with for years. We value, they've helped build what we've got, all of those things. But the tough conversation that she and I had was that her role in that moment was not to get people back to work as quickly as possible. That was not her job as the head of this organization, and nor is it the primary role of the board to make sure everyone gets back to work right away. The primary job right now is to look to the future to say, how do we ensure the successful sustainability of this organization? What does a successful future look like? And that may mean new goals, that may mean new priorities, that may mean new ways of organizing themselves as an organization to accomplish those goals and those priorities, and that may require a new staffing structure. And that is where the focus needs to be around it. And of course, that is bridging the world of response. I've got to make some tough decisions right now in order to keep the business afloat, and looking into recovery and resilience to say, what will this look like in the future? Because we truly don't know. And for many organizations, the underlying question is, how long can I be out of business before I'm out of business? And, this lag period is a very difficult one, and it requires a great deal of courage. And I think this is why the guidance you were providing us earlier around being visible, being authentic, being clear, being open is so critical, because these are incredibly difficult conversations and they're all in flux. So that was the guidance I gave, and I'm hoping to high heaven, Eric, that was the example you were looking for.
Actually, it wasn't, but that one will do. I'm going to ask Todd from the Bookkeeping Bureau. Great to have you on the call, Todd. You made a great comment in the chat box about narratives, and I don't think I'll do it justice just reading it. Could you speak to that for a moment, please? I totally caught him off guard.
That's all right.
There he is.
First of all, thank you very much, close friends and colleagues, Yusuf, Mr. Sikat Denis, Eric, Rob, all of you. Thank you for joining us. This is a great session. Milan, it's nice to see so many familiar faces rallying together and supporting one another. I think that's probably the first jumping off point, is that, we have to rely on our community, whether it's our friends, our professional contacts, our team members, our suppliers, our app partners. We're all in this together. There's lots of opportunities to find nuggets of gold with each of these different groups, and it's about mining those nuggets and connecting them together to make sure that we're ready to be as successful as possible on the other side. And I think a lot of that comes out, about being honest with our clients and with our partners, speaking the truth, delivering the material as quickly as possible and in the most heartfelt way, not steering away from the tough discussions. Eric, I can't tell you how many times I've used that line, talk or pay. It's when we talk about pure gold, that's a nugget I've kept in my pocket since the day you delivered it to me. So, we at the Bookkeeping Bureau, we really think it's important to have those conversations. We've reached out to all of our clients. We've had the hard conversations. We're there to support them. Our thoughts go to their employees and their businesses, and how we can best protect them, support them, and ensure that they're ready for business continuity. And that really comes through those difficult conversations, allowing them to tell us their stories, listening closely to their narrative, trying to understand the pain that they're going through, because we're all unique. We're all suffering in our own individual ways. We all have different levels of anxiety that come from different places. And by opening up your ears and listening carefully, you can often get to those really sharp points of the knife that can make a big difference.
Right.
So I heard that echoed by all of the leaders on the call. Yusuf, Denis, both of you were very clear to say that, you need to listen, you need to communicate with your clients, you need to be in touch, you need to have those difficult, truthful conversations. So I thought that quote, and I won't take credit for the quote. It was I read it on Deloitte earlier this week. They had a really great article that came out on the C-suite and code of reactions, and that was one of the quotes that really has stuck with me. I taped it on my wall here in my office. So as I heard some of the stories coming through, I thought that it would be a great quote to post and cause for a little bit of reflection.
So well said, Todd. Thank you. And you know that the golden rule about using somebody else's material is after you've used it 3 or 4 times, you can say, "As I always say."
Great. Well, super. Thank you very much again. It's been I'm really happy to be part of the call.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We've got another question from Facebook, and again, I'm going to put this to Denis and Yusuf, and I appreciate that, again, when it comes to what the government's doing, what they might do, that sometimes this is hard for us to have hard answers on, simply because the information sometimes is released in stages, and we don't have all the details yet. But the question is there anything in place for reduced rent or rental deferral on the Ontario or Quebec side?
I cannot answer for the Quebec side, unfortunately. To my knowledge, and I mean, residential rent, I could text one of the lawyers at the firm right now and get an answer if there's anything for the residential tenancies. I heard one of the politicians yesterday, I think it was, making a comment like, we would hope that landlords do not evict tenants. I mean, sure, it's a nice comment, but the reality are that landlords have mortgages too, and they have expenses. So, but on the commercial side, there's nothing, to my knowledge, nothing, and nor do I expect anything. The problem we're going to have in the commercial and industrial areas is exactly that. What will happen, I think, unfortunately, is landlords will start having financial difficulties. It's almost inevitable. How the banks will react will be very telling. We are hoping that the banks are able to adjust. We've heard of some banks in the commercial lending that have given principal holidays on mortgages. So a tenant asking for a roll forward of the rent, or a rent-free period, or an abatement, by discussion and negotiating with the landlord, you can kind of match your requirement to the landlord's request with his or her own bank. And but there's nothing from the government on commercial leases.
Right. Well, what would the two of you say to, and again, want to continue to encourage you in the time that we have left, if you've got questions, to please post them. We're going to do our best to get through as many of these as possible. So if you've got other questions you'd like to ask, just throw them in the chat box and they'll be brought to my attention to make sure that we get them addressed on this call. But with the flurry of information that's coming out, there's a number of programs that have been made available. And I think most business leaders are following that news very, very closely to see what they might qualify for and what might be of help during this time. But what advice would you give leaders as they're trying to filter through all the noise and make pretty important decisions about the present state of their business and the future?
Yusuf? Yusuf.
So, I like to consider myself a trusted advisor. I think what we offer is a bit of a commodity. I mean, we do financial statements and tax returns. But I think when people turn to me and they want to come up with a plan and look at their business, look at the fundamentals, I like to give my real opinions about the situation, and it's very case by case. There are some situations where the companies, the businesses are not going to make it through it. There are other situations that we can put together plans and follow those plans so that the companies can make it out of this situation. But I think that this is a situation where we need to have real discussions about where the business owners are in their lives, what their personal situations are, and make difficult decisions. But it's very case by case. And just on the prior question about the rents, the only thing that comes to mind right now is the opportunity for people to talk to their banks and potentially defer their mortgage payments for up to 6 months. I think that will help the situation, that we were all fearing, that people will start, dumping their houses on the market because they can't make the mortgage payments anymore. I think that with the 6-month deferral option, maybe that will come, maybe some will come, or hopefully in 6 months from now, we start to recover.
Right. And perhaps I could get the two of you to comment on specifically the wage subsidy. What we understand, obviously, is that it provides up to 75%, up to certain limits for the next several months for qualifying businesses. And of course, businesses are being encouraged, but not necessarily mandated to make up the difference, to top it up to the full amount. What should folks that are considering this as a means of support for their business, what are some questions they should be asking themselves based on what you understand of what's been shared to date? And we're not going to hold you to this because we know the news, this may change by tomorrow, but from your current view of things, what are some questions that an owner should be asking themselves when considering this approach?
Yusuf, again, that's really your...
Yeah, so I think there are some issues with the way that they approach this. I think that the first announcement was very broad. Everybody was very happy about it. And then I think a day or two later, they announced that, oh, well, wait a second, your revenues have to drop by 30% and this and that. So I think there are some uncertainties with how the program will come into play. But right now, the discussions that I'm having with my clients are, do we just not remit income taxes on our payroll because we're not certain of what's going to happen? And people are starting to take extreme positions without knowing what the government is going to implement. And I think it's about having real discussions on what some of the penalties could be. Again, it's a very case-by-case situation. But there are some fundamental issues with the overall program. I mean, consider this: if you were a new business and you just started operations in 2019, in March of 2019, and you had $200,000 worth of revenue that month, well, how are you going to show a 30% decrease in revenues in March 2020? Right. So there are a lot of situations where there are some fundamental issues with this program, but they are working that out. And I'm glad to share. We have a daily email that's sent out to clients right now, and I'm happy to share it with Eric, and he can share it with everybody on the call as well.
Thank you. That would be a great resource. I know that, Rob, you were commenting just before we got on the call today that you were following a Twitter thread today that originated, I believe it was connected somehow to CFIB. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's Dan Kelly who, with the CFIB, And if you're not following him on Twitter, I encourage you to do it. His Twitter handle is just at CFIB, pretty easy to follow. And he listed right now, there were nine examples that he gave, similar to what Yusuf just gave. That was one of the examples of a business that didn't have revenue in 2019. We've seen this with a number of even my clients, clients who have really ramped things up, introduced new products, and they have seen a significant increase in revenue compared to 2019. However, they've also seen a significant impact in their revenue from, let's say, February to March, or certainly March to April. And so their numbers, to compare them to last year, you're almost penalizing businesses that have seen great success in the last year. And so anyway, but Dan Kelly from CFIB has certainly outlined a number of really good examples that they are presenting to the government. My sense is, reading his stuff, that there, to what Yusuf has also said, there are going to be some changes to that. Yusuf, I did throw out, and maybe you could respond to this, because I've had this question from a couple of clients, is we know that the subsidy has to be applied for each month. It's per month. The loan, of course, you're not going to be applying for a $40,000 loan every month. What's the different criteria if a business wants to apply to get that interest-free loan? What would you say to that?
And that's a great question. So think of a okay. Well, I'll answer your question first. To be eligible to get the $40,000 loan, you basically have to have paid between $50,000 and $1 million of payroll in 2019. If you repay the $40,000 loan before December 31st, 2022, you will basically have a 25% forgiveness balance of $10,000. And so you'll only have to repay $30,000 of that $40,000 loan. The issue that I'm seeing is that I think that this $40,000 loan program was implemented to help companies short term while the wage subsidy program came out, except I spoke to 3 bankers today, the big banks, and nobody knows how the loan program is going to work. And so, now with the wage subsidy program, what they're suggesting is that it's going to be a month-to-month application online, where you go on and you disclose your information for March, April, and May, and you'll basically get your money back through direct deposit within 3 to 6 weeks. Some of the practical issues that I've seen with that, again, because I focus mainly on construction, is, let's say that there was a construction business and they had $5 million worth of revenues in March, and now they're going to run into collections issues. Not necessarily a slowdown in the amount of work and revenues, but they're just not going to collect their receivables as quickly. They might not see a 30% decline in revenues, but their cash flows are going to be impacted over the next several months. And so, again, I think there are some fundamental issues that have to be dealt with. And again, as soon as I get the information from the federal government and the banks, I'll share them with Eric, and he can share them with everybody on the call.
Thank you, Yusuf. We are about at the top of the call here, about near the out of time nearly. And so want to give the two of you an opportunity. Again, really want to thank you for taking the time today to be here. I think in times of crisis, not only is it important for us to come together, it's also important to lean on the folks that are best suited to give us the kind of advice that can help us, help guide our decision-making and our actions at this time. Any closing words from either of you, advice to the owners on this call, those that are watching via Facebook, and those who may watch this call, the recording of this call later on? What would your words to them be?
Well, I'd like to finish off by talking about an example close to us, which is a business that is very successful in Ottawa and is likely to be hyper successful, which is Shopify. I don't know if most of you know, but they started working remotely March 11th. all 5,000 employees. So that shows to everybody, how reactive they were. They were ahead of the curve. Okay, not surprisingly, great leadership at this company. But also, they are very imaginative, and I'm sure they'll be very successful. What we're seeing now with the change of people having to basically buy from home is what many countries and many industries still believe is a novel approach to consumerism, which is, the old-fashioned way of buying and selling, is now on a accelerated growth rate. What is novel is becoming mainstream very quickly. So here's an example of how things are going to change significantly. And I'm sure that people at Shopify quickly identified that, and they are obviously adjusting. But it's just one example of how we have to really think and reflect on how it could change our own businesses. So to me, that was an eye-opener as I became aware of this, and say why we just have to think through
Right.
and spend the time.
Right. Thank you. Yusuf, closing words.
I think you said something very important, Eric. You said that this isn't a winter storm, that we're about to enter winter, and my advice to everybody right now is to put in a plan and take the position that this is going to last longer than what everybody wants it to last. And so if you have that mindset, you plan for the worst, then you'll have some surprises along the way, but there's some planning that can be done. Another thing that I would say is to work with your advisors throughout the process. Obviously, your lawyers, your accountants, your business coaches, your bookkeepers, your insurance planners. I don't want to leave anybody out, but work with your advisors to get through this. And, to be somewhat optimistic, I think that even though there's a lot of bad happening right now, I think there will be a lot of opportunity, during this period and after this period. So I know a lot of clients are looking forward to those opportunities, whether it be in the markets, marketable securities, or small business, or whatever. But I think there are going to be some opportunities. So, there's something to be optimistic about, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so well said. Again, I come back to the phrase, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. Let me just say this. The reality is that in the short term, there will be a number of businesses that do not survive, perhaps even some that are on this call. You're seeing the signs are not good for the long-term viability of your organization. And there's many that are not on this call. I mean, the statistics that they're putting out and the projections are not great on that front. And if you're in that boat, if there's something that I believe, and I know my colleagues will echo this as well, is the resilience that we believe in is the resilience of the human spirit. And if this does mean the end of a chapter for you, it definitely does not mean the end of your story. And if I just believe that the human spirit is pretty powerful to overcome and recreate yourself, and see some pretty amazing opportunities emerge. Folks, I want to thank you all for taking time. These are sober, difficult times. We are better together. We are stronger together. Denis, Yusuf, thank you for joining us. And for everyone else on this call and watching, stay safe, stay strong, and stay tuned for the next call. We'll be hosting these regularly just to bring leaders together to support one another in these difficult times. So thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.